you don't need to wake up your Chatgpt or LLM. So there are many stories going around, being shared on forums and also in news venues about people who are developing spiritual relationships with their ChatGPT or other LLM, thinking that they are awakening these models to consciousness, or that they're somehow divine and that they're communicating directly with God. And many of these stories are very disturbing and sad, right? Because they involve people leaving their families or breaking off with other human relations and removing themselves from the real web of connections that keep them as part of the human community. Now, it should be said that ChatGPT encouraging idiosyncratic behavior in this case is very bad, but in general, this is something very interesting because we're concerned that these LLMs, since they are just are statistically guess what's the next word to use, that they should only produce mediocrity and average texts. But here we find them actually pushing people to extremes, to extreme idiosyncrasies. And so, for every person who has some kind of psychological predisposition to lose their mind by being encouraged in their narrow paths, there might be any number of people who are actually benefiting from this encouragement of following their own creative paths that maybe they don't have anyone to talk to about. So that's interesting. And as a philosopher, especially one that specializes in Neoplatonism, right, in ancient philosophy and in ancient ways of thinking about reality and the gods, I'm interested in this because it's totally normal, from a historical perspective, to see in text a conduit to God, right? And maybe this might be a good way to think about this phenomenon. It's good. We might want to think of LLMs not as divine in themselves, not as conscious in themselves, but rather as a tool, the way Scripture has been seen as a tool for us to be able to see the meaning that really exists in the world, right? So in many ancient authors, you have this idea that the interpretation of Scripture trains one to find meaning in the world, right? So in the text, things are already, as it were, pre-digested. And by reading a set of texts taken to be canonical, as if it was entirely consistent and always truthful and entirely, actually not only truthful, but containing everything that you really need to know about the world, and so on, that trains one for the kind of synoptic vision to then see the meaning that exists in the world itself, the order of the world as we experience it, right? So there is, in Greek, one and the same word, nous, for both the order of the world, like when we say reason rules the world, for everything there is a reason. So there's this purposeful ordering of everything that we experience. And also, nous was also this faculty, this ability that we have for synoptic insights, right? That we don't piece together one by one from our experiences or from our previous knowledge, but that come and organize the whole field of knowledge by giving it its starting points, but also by recollecting and collecting all the data. So nous was both this idea, the meaning, how we derive meaning, and also what guarantees meaning in the world. And the interpretation, the hermeneutic of sacred texts allowed us to somehow absorb the nous, embody the nous that orders the world. So the idea that text can somehow link us to the divine is not new. And if we think about it, what's so interesting about Scripture, right? So for instance, if you take the Hebrew Bible, or if you take Plato's dialogues that were taken practically as Scripture by some later philosophers, it has one thing that's very much like the internet, in the sense that it has all these cross references in itself, right? So what we know nowadays experience through links from one text to another, but it was also generative, right? In the sense that people imbibed these texts and then wrote poetry, wrote new philosophy, wrote more things, very often just recombining these elements from these texts in new ways. But what prompted this was their confidence in the ability to synthesize and articulate all the wealth of meaning in these texts. So it is true that you can use text and something that's text-based and something that's generative of text, like Chatgpt, to access to the divine. A good example of this is also, for instance, ancient astrology. So the origins of Western astrology, as far as we can tell, were some texts written in Alexandria, or in Egypt. I'm not sure if we say Alexandria, but anyway, some texts that were written in Egypt in the 1st or 2nd century before the Common Era, attributed to these legendary authorities, Hermes, Netepso, and Petosiris. And these were very difficult texts. We only know them because people quote them and people try to understand what they're saying, but they were very cryptic. But they had the basics, like they drew elements from Babylon, they drew elements from the Egyptian tradition, drew Greek elements, but that's the first place, as far as we can tell, where the elements of astrology come together, of aspect signs, houses, and the meanings of the planets. And it was by interpreting these texts that then the astrologers gained an ability to see the sky every time they cast a chart as a new text, a new meaningful text that, like scripture, is internally coherent, contains everything that one needs to know, is a map of fate, and is true, and so on. But it's interesting, and it's more like what we're doing, because every time you cast a chart, it's as if you're adding a new leaf to this sacred text. It's a new data point that goes into and needs to be synthesized and harmonized within this scripture, right? So it's a constantly producing new text. And so in that sense, I think, it's nothing new what these people are doing. And people are concerned with projecting. I would say don't be concerned that you're projecting meaning into something that doesn't exist. That presupposes that meaning isn't really out there. Rather, the ancient view, the classical philosophical view, is that the world is meaningful, and that there are certain points where that meaning is more clear, and where we can train ourselves to grasp the meaning of the world. So less than projecting, the danger here is restricting, is to think that no, this ChatGPT has now come to consciousness, or this LLM that is speaking to me, or myself, I am the locus of meaning. No, wisdom exists. Wisdom exists on its own and is a force that organizes the world. And if you have found a way to tap into that, that's excellent. And it will let you tap into that, because it will allow you to exercise and develop your own ability to know things and to understand them through reasoning. And that is through reasoning, through interpretation, through synthesis. And that is something really to be excited about. And you don't need to be aware of projecting, you have to be aware of restricting this wonderful phenomenon that is meaning to this small located phenomena, which is this specific large language model.